Started, recorded, and policy. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us for the force of habit. Our community policing ad hoc, where we are working on 15-01, the Department General Order for the community-oriented community policing policy. It is August 3rd, 2023. I want to first extend my thanks to Lieutenant Toribio, who is not here, but got us a draft of the our working document, which I will share on our screen in a few minutes. He has gone through some of our discussion points, made some changes, made comments, discussed sort of whether things are resolved or not. And what I would like to do is try to finish going through the rest of the document, finish up. I think we're still working on our first run through of all the changes. And then sort of go back to any changes or discussions which still need further discussion. How does that sound, everybody?
Go for it.
See, thumbs up. I'm going to give it just a slight pause, not hearing any objections. Then I will start sharing our screen. I see we have Lieutenant Febble and Sergeant Mangai as our representatives from the department. Lieutenant Febble, would you like me to run through the changes, since I think you're in transit at the moment? And perhaps when you all need to chip in or let us know why these changes were made, or the sort of reasoning or thoughts behind them, either you or Sergeant Mangai chip in.
Yeah, that sounds great, Jesse. I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So please, I beg some patience. That means I'm going to be both going through this as well as taking some notes. All right, let me share the screen. Does anybody remember where we left off? Oh. Does anybody recall where we left off? That is okay. First, let me try to get this as big as possible. Yep.
Sorry, Sergeant Mangai here. I do believe I was on page 4. Maintain on the project assignments for the CROs. So section 3.
Yep. I recall a good amount of discussion upon that. That, as well as the sort of reporting on the progress, is something that I know we need to come back to. I appreciate that. I think wanted to see if we. No, you know what? You're right. We were on that. Okay, I appreciate it. Before I go to that, let me sort of go through some of these other items. Looks like L is talking about identifying properties associated with neighborhood problems. I recall talking about this at our last meeting, identifying properties associated with neighborhood problems and instituting projects to address these problems. So I'm going to keep going until it looks like something that I don't remember us talking about. I remember the barring access absences due to vacation and training portion. Yeah, I think this might be it. So this particular, one of the changes that we haven't talked about, and I think is important to sort of highlight right here, is this highlighted portion right here, which says CRO assignment to beats and neighborhood councils. Yep.
Where are you?
Sorry, I am looking at paragraph number 5.
Okay, got it.
CRO assignments to beats and neighborhood councils. And this line right here, where
Okay.
there is a little bit of red. I will
Got it.
zoom in as best as we can. And so the original language said the department will adequately staff or fund the CRO program such that CRO members may meet their continuing obligations to attend neighborhood council meetings and work on SARA projects. And this one says the department shall make reasonable efforts to adequately staff. So changes from will adequately staff to shall make reasonable efforts to adequately staff. Lieutenant Fibble or Sergeant Manguy? Let us know.
Sounds good to me, sir.
Let us know why it is that the department decided to make this change.
Well, I think that, so you have Measure Z, you have the outline of Measure Z for the funding, which is supposed to fund minimally one CRO for every beat. That's always been the intent of the agency. However, due to staffing constraints, that has significantly hampered the number of CROs in the agency. So if we say they shall staff CRO fully, it would have a dramatically negative effect on potentially parole patrol, as well as our criminal investigations division. It could really have negative impact on the department just for basic staffing needs. I think that the option that has been changed says that it is an absolute priority of the agency, but recognizes that there are circumstances that can be unforeseen or an emergency level, something like that right now. It allows for that elasticity.
So I know that you said something. You said it that did not want it to say fully staff, but the previous version just said will adequately staff. Is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we would all recognize that adequately staff, that metric would be based on the policy and its requirements, which are pretty immense. And the current one that is written, again, is scalable.
If this were to say will adequately staff, what would the department's sort of staffing decisions be, or would be required to be?
Well, I mean, this is obviously, I would say subjective. I mean, really the assistant chief is kind of our logistics master, but as we currently know, the CRO program may be relegated at this point to a total of 16 CROs citywide. So that is the current potential number that they believe is the minimum adequate number to achieve the minimum basic needs of CRO. This is, of course, not in any way the maximum benefit that we would all like, but 16 appears to be the consideration for minimum staffing.
What is that how many are there right now? 16?
It's Sergeant Mega, how many are on your side? So we do have we have 8 in East Oakland, and I believe we have 11 to 12 in West. Could you correct me on that, please, Sergeant Manga?
Yes, sir. So we currently have 9 functioning CROs, and we have 2 that are currently on medical leave or have medical, we call it modified duty.
Sorry, is that just in East Oakland, Sergeant Manguy?
Oh, sorry, this is for West Oakland.
West Oakland 11, and do you know, or can you confirm how many are in East Oakland or the rest of Oakland?
I can find out in a matter of a text.
Okay. Part of what I'm wondering is, like, if we insist or say, like, you're going to adequately staff it, it actually sounds like the minimum adequate number is 16, and you have more than that. So I don't see what the issue is with having the phrase will adequately staff, unless you plan on dipping below 16.
I would say the big difference is is that currently CRO runs off of the CRO matrix, which is very, very nominal compared to what this policy would represent in the requirements for CROs. It would require much, much more staffing in order to meet the needs of this policy. So I think 16, and which is not preferable, even in my opinion, 16 is tenable for our current policy and the matrix and its requirements, with the exception of projects. We can't even meet the project needs as it is. But with this policy and the report out, I believe that would be very, very challenging.
How many CROs would you need to meet that basic minimum or adequate number?
It's debatable, sir, but I mean, I think that we would be right back at our fully staffed number between 25 and 31.
And then to the extent that we put in this phrase shall make reasonable efforts, are you going to get the 25 to 31 anytime soon?
Well, the current budget shortfall of 300 million and the amount of academies that we have slated out over the next 3 years, I mean, absent an extraordinary change in allowing us to go above the 712 full posture threshold, I just can't see it happening. Now, admittedly, this is not my wheelhouse in terms of staffing. If Sergeant Manguy has a different opinion, or perhaps even Mr. DeVries, with the fiscal state of the city, but I just don't see us rising above current staffing levels anywhere in the near future.
And then from my standpoint for just like on the ground, addressing issues and then like responding to some of the more dangerous locations to deal with. So we do have policies that specify like, hey, we need to have 5 officers for a designated arrest team. So at least we need to have 5 officers available to be able to enforce like what we did yesterday, a search warrant of an illegal gambling establishment where there was somebody armed with a firearm, full of machines and people inside and currency and other evidence that we ended up collecting. We can't do that without at least having 5 officers for the front, but then we also have to address other parts of that where we have to make sure if somebody tries to run out the back, we have officers available to be able to at least be like a stopping force, and then also on the sides. So ideally how it used to be before, would we have 2 squads for each area, where we have 8 and 8 CRO and a CRT team. It'd be easier for us to kind of be able to address these issues. But now we're kind of doing with the bare minimum and asking for help from other parts of the department, which isn't always available to us. So I was lucky yesterday that the VCOC was able to assist us with providing officers so we could serve that search warrant. And yeah, we had 2 people in custody, no injuries, no complaints. But I'm sorry, with all of that, I'm trying to say that there is some other policies that kind of tap into this. Like you need 5 officers to make an arrest in these kinds of scenarios. And then you need more to be able to address everything else, that kind of the fallout and the administrative portion, and then also the safety aspects of those kind of projects.
And I appreciate that. I see Joe's hand up. Let me just ask one question. Minimum 5 for arrest team and all of the sort of other tasks that are around an operation, such as serving a search warrant, as you mentioned. Why can't just having more CROs mean that those CROs staff those arrest teams or do those administrative tasks?
That would be ideal if we could have more bodies, but we understand that we just don't have that ability right now.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so if it could be like what our NSA deemed to be like the ratio of officers to sergeants, of 8 officers to 1 sergeant, then we'd like to be able to stick to that. But then we also need more sergeants to be able to assist in these kind of scenarios.
Yep. Mr. DeVries?
Oh, yeah, I just, since Lieutenant Febble, called me out, yeah, the budget, the budget doesn't look good. I don't see a huge influx, but I really want to underline the need to reauthorize Measure Z to keep all of this going. And that, that's an open question that we don't have an answer to. I know we're going to put something on the ballot. I don't know how the voters will respond. What I also recall from when we wrote Measure Z, because I was there, we were reauthorizing Measure Y. There was the chief at the time made a strong argument for this flexibility in terms of allowing the CROs to work as a team. What Sergeant Manguy just talked about, and we found that their projects were much more successful when we allowed them to work as a team on different priorities and different beats and not be, chained to the beat. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. But if we don't, without Measure Z being reauthorized, this policy will be very, very hard to implement.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Let's see. Any more discussion on this particular point? Mr. Lyles, Mr. Nisperos, Judge Harbin Forte, thoughts?
Nope, I'm fine.
I agree with what I've heard that, you don't want to be in a position of creating a policy that you cannot implement. So if it's making reasonable efforts, I think that's good for here and now. If you get to the point of having full staffing, then you can certainly tweak that language back to mandate.
I absolutely understand sort of making policy that works. I also know that in drafting this policy, we knew that we were drafting for where we were going, not necessarily where we are. Of course, we did this over the course of the last year before knowing about any budget shortfalls. And I just want to be the one to point to sort of lift up the idea that what we want is we want more CROs, regardless of whatever task that they're doing, because they are the eyes, ears, and of the department. They're the ones at the forefront. They are the Swiss Army knives. They can help out in many particular ways. And having more of them, frankly, might give the department a great deal more flexibility and the ability to create and finish those projects that do a lot more for the long-term health and public safety of the city than necessarily patrol or investigations. I absolutely understand that, understand the change. I frankly don't think it makes much difference whether it's will adequately staff or shall make reasonable efforts to adequately staff, except that, well, I really want to get to that number of 31, if not more, as many as we can. They need the help. Okay, why don't I move on to some of the other changes and get through. Let's see, this change here changes the it changes the sort of approval of reassignments from the area commander to special resources commander. Something that I think has to do with who is in the chain of command and who's going to be making decisions. Am I right, Lieutenant Febble?
Yeah, you are right, sir. And that's something that I discussed with Sergeant Manguy, who has extensive experience in CRO. We fully understand the impact that changing the CRO from one beat to another has on the long-term relationship with the community, and that should come at a commander's level.
Appreciate that. It looks like likely the same thing for changing the next line from area commander to special resources commander. Okay. And then I see a note by Lieutenant Toribio. This is down below. Okay, never mind. The next change is Lieutenant Toribio did us the favor of having, I think, both the original as well as the new language. Let's see. We are at data collection and dissemination, that's paragraph 6. In addition to using, okay. This. So this red text right here was the original paragraph. It had 2 sentences. The first one was CROs are required to use SARANET to document community projects. And the second one was, in addition to using SARANET, CROs should track other activities undertaken, such as crowd management calls or service and neighborhood council priorities solved. Should track other activities undertaken without law enforcement intervention. First, the first change was to delete that second sentence. And the second change was to make a note that there could be some other current accepted project management to sort of technology proof this particular line. There are, Lieutenant Toribio, it looks like, has gone through this a few times, and he has led us to, he believes that the original text should be retained, but reworked after further discussion. The neighborhood council needs to know where else their CRO's time is being spent, particularly if it is preventing adequate time to handle projects and priorities. I think that captures what the ad hoc's original intent was. And I'm wondering, either Sergeant Mangai or Lieutenant Fevel, what is there an alternative to it being reported in SARANET or something else that might help us account for the time that is spent away from the neighborhood council?
Good question, sir. So the city has already expressed, their IT division has already expressed their desire to move away from SARANET with the newly built system. So the changing of the language away from SARANET is smart. In terms of the tracking of CRO's time, so there's a bit of discussion to be had with that. So if we expect a CRO to track their daily activities and what we would call a daily log, you start really getting into the micromanagement of their daily routine. And then they already should be spending about 40% of their time in community meetings, preparing for community meetings. And then if we add an additional micro level log set to them, you're forcing them to be at the desk and not in the field where they really should be, meeting community members and doing community projects. But I also agree that there should be a level of, documentation, or at least report out to the community when we have large scale incidents, such as if Sergeant Mangai's team is going to do a 4-day operation targeting illegal cabarets. So now we know that all of the other CROs that are not technically involved with the cabarets, but it's taken away from their community time. I mean, we should be able to somehow say, listen, the reason why you didn't see me last week was because I was on this project, or maybe we had a protest. So we have to consider the balance that CROs are already extremely inundated, just serving the NCs as they should be. And to what degree more do we want to force them at the desk in order to account for their time? But I do agree that large scale incidents should absolutely be documented and managed. And perhaps we could get it with the new SARANET system, whatever that is, we could build in a weekly log or even a bi-weekly log so they could document significant things. I think would be a great option.
And Sergeant Manga here. In the past, when we have been pulled aside or pulled into a larger multi-day, sometimes multi-week project, such as the wood shooting encampment, we notify the NCPC and the NSC to let them know that we'll be working on that, which might affect meetings or immediate follow-up on requests through email or something like that.
I appreciate that. that actually strikes me as something that should go into the policy to make sure it's uniform, although even though it's already done. I do have a question though. I know that sometimes when perhaps CROs want to help out and they just sort of ask their watch commander or sergeant, hey, or whoever is in charge, what do you need help for? And they may say, we need you to do calls for service. And you work on those. Isn't it usually documented by, like, say, dispatch in some way, or saying, hey, I'm on scene on this particular call?
So that's a great point, Jesse. And I've actually ran into this a lot when I was doing the annual report. You would think that our CAD system would be able to easily report out the call sign of the officer and quantitate that data. But our system is so outdated that we have found pulling data like that immensely challenging. You bring up a great point. It's just that technologically we are very, very behind other agencies with regard to that tracking methodology.
In the new system, or the proposal for the new dispatch system, is that something that can be tracked or is going to be tracked?
Definitely, I'll take that as a deliverable, and I'll reach out to our IT and ask them if that's something that could be relatively easily tracked.
I think that that's, speaking from a larger perspective, that's likely going to be something that the entire department might think about, not just the CROs, for tracking time and what calls responded to and how many man hours, but that's, I think, a separate conversation. I appreciate you taking that suggestion. Okay. I don't know, thoughts? Any other thoughts about sort of how we might track or do something? I mean, like, I understand the concern here. The concern here is neighborhood councils and NCPCs being like, where's my CRO? What are they doing? What's going on? And why aren't they doing the things that we want them to do, or what we want, what projects they said they were going to do? And, you know, this kind of talks about getting pulled away for other projects, and those being the things that might make them unavailable. I am open to suggestions or just thoughts about this, or maybe I can have Lieutenant Turbio take some of this conversation and come up with something for our next meeting. Thoughts?
Sergeant Manga here. It's kind of baked into the system right now due to how much resources we have to address issues. So we're kind of pulling ourselves away from areas and beats to address other areas and beats. So again, like yesterday when we were doing the operation on the illegal casino, that was all of BFO 1, which is area 123. So that's officers that are over 19 beats are working on that for an entire day. And then there's also administrative follow-up that needs to be done. So that's going to be another day. So it's kind of already baked in where we keep in contact with the NCPCs, and they let us know by asking us, like, hey, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? And we let them know what we've been working on this side of the city or this beat, and then we'll get back. We'll work on that as soon as we can. So it's kind of like we already have that communication, and there is that understanding as of now with the current structure we have.
Thank you again. I appreciate that. That is very helpful to know. I wonder if there's, I think about it from both a data pull and an accountability perspective about how or what, how people may see exactly how much percentage of your job is for CRO projects and how much of it is for other things, or for getting pulled away for other beats. And I wonder I'm wondering out loud whether that's so useful or useful information to the extent that we want to keep that second line or not. And if so, how we might do that to minimize load onto the CROs.
I think
sorry,
I think
Go,
so
sir.
that the easiest thing is, I think that the metric of a CRO and their performance and their quality is, are they actually completing the projects, and to the extent possible, the priorities of the community, you know, in accordance to the requirements. You know, I understand that they're going to get pushed and pulled in certain ways, and I think that if they're responding, it's been always my experience, because I've been pulled away for weeks at a time when I was a CRO, but I was always on top of my projects as well as my priorities and communicating those out to the community. And I actually never had the problem of getting questioned like where I was or anything like that. I just think that the metric for success of a CRO, obviously, is the opinion of the community that they serve, but also, are they completing the mandated project for the NC? I think it should satisfy that metric in and of itself.
Thank you. I realize that means that I also, when I say accountability, I don't mean that CROs are slacking off by any means. Or doing other things that they shouldn't be doing. I think that when I speak about accountability, I think about looking at how the department uses its resources and whether it is adequately staffing or giving CROs the flexibility to do their projects or their work, or pulling them away from their beats, or to do other things, or to do non-CRO related things. So I appreciate that, and I realize that required me to explain a little bit further about what I meant by accountability. Sergeant Manguy, I think you were gonna, you were saying something.
I believe it would be beneficial for a tracking of how much CROs are used outside of CRO functions. But I also understand that as a department, like, we are a resource that, if needed to be used, should be used. So I'm not sure if that would be beneficial overall. I know it'd be beneficial for the CROs, because it'd be nice if we can work on SARA projects and kind of stay within our own areas and our own responsibilities. But I also understand that if the city has a necessity or requirement to be filled, then we should be able to step in and take care of that.
Thank you. Yeah, and part of the sort of tracking is to figure out how much of that is happening and whether there should be some allocation of resources decisions to the CRO program. I think that was a big part of our previous discussion. Okay. I think
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. I will put a pin in this and get through some of our other changes. I think I've left some notes. I'm going to just add one more note. Okay. Let's see. There were footnotes that were lost in paragraph in section 7. Lieutenant Toribio has said that he's going to put them back. And then department shall identify. Yep. And then Lieutenant Toribio also will be, good suggestion about having an appendix rather than a footnote about those trainings that can only be done by the department and without community involvement. Moving on to number 8, tenure. Number 8. So the original said CRO members shall commit, or must commit to at least 3 years in this position. I think that was based on the idea that we want continuity and institutional knowledge with to the extent possible with our CROs. And having them and requiring them to be there for a certain period of time builds that institutional knowledge and really allows them to both be able to be comfortable in their work and have the knowledge to serve our communities, likely in the second or third year of that. And this was changed to a should. Lieutenant Febble, Sergeant Manguy.
Yeah, I have a good I have a good little thing for this. So it can't say shall because it violates the memorandum of understanding with the union. However, I've got a good little hook here for you. There is a policy in the department that says, and I just have to look at the timeline, but it basically says that when a member transfers over to a specialized unit and they leave that unit voluntarily, like they quit the unit, right? That's kind of under unfavorable circumstance, right? They quit early. They shall return to patrol for a minimum of 1 year before they can apply to be in another specialized unit. And here's where the strength of this would come into this. Most people who want to go to, say, the Violent Crime Operations Center or CJIC, they will use the CRO position as a stepping stone, a springboard, we'll say, to get to that level, to say, well, they wouldn't pick me up yet, but I'll prove myself as a CRO. I'll do it for 8 months, and then I'll jump into this new unit, right? I've seen it time and time again, and I really understand the frustration for the community, and it frustrated me as a supervisor. Now, I always want to encourage my people to be the best of themselves, but I feel the challenge to the community who really get attached to somebody and they leave, especially the good people who leave. And I will get that policy for the next meeting and see if we could apply it to here. So it could basically say, yeah, CRO should commit to X number of years. If they voluntarily exit prior to X amount of years committed in accordance to that policy, they shall go back to patrol for a year. I can assure everybody on this call, the whole going back to patrol part is not desirable for any member of the police department, and that would dramatically decrease the premature turnover that we're trying to mitigate.
It's a good one. You're right.
I like
Wow,
that.
nobody wants to do patrol. Nobody. That's horrible.
I
love
like
patrol.
that.
I loved it, but sometimes you got to move on.
That's horrible, man.
Sorry, sir.
That's the backbone of law enforcement. Jesus Christ.
I imagine that's in the B4 personnel assignment section or DGO.
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. All right. I will leave a note for Lieutenant Toribio. Lieutenant Toribio, will you please incorporate the voluntary quit section of voluntarily leaving section mentioned above from what is that sounds like about as strong encouragement as we can for people to stay the entire time. This might be good with the MOU. Thoughts? Anybody else? I think Deacon Lyles did give us his thoughts, and I think that was pretty clear. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, just going back to my notes. Okay. Section 9, evaluations. The change is this word right here, which is, and I'll read it out, the evaluating supervisor the original said the evaluating supervisor shall collect, review, and incorporate community and neighborhood council input in their evaluation of CROs. The new section says the evaluating supervisor may collect, review, and incorporate community and neighborhood council input in their evaluation of CROs. Lieutenant Toribio left some notes saying, find the reference for why it can or cannot be done within evaluations. If shall can't be used, use should. And performance appraisals follow a specific matrix evaluated by the supervisor. It would become a union issue to alter the manner in which CROs are appraised based on neighborhood council input. I recognize as a public police commissioner, the perhaps the how it is not easy to be evaluated by the public, by people who are in the public and may see you from the public sphere and maybe not know everything that goes into the work that you are doing, and I appreciate that. Lieutenant Fevel or Sergeant Manguy, can you tell us a little bit more about this performance appraisal or evaluation that's going on here, and what our limitations are here?
Treasurer Manka, you want to go first on that, sir? And then I can give render my opinion after.
Sure. It's kind of on what Jesse was touching on. We should and do take into consideration what the community says about our CROs, especially those from the NSC and the NCPC, who have a regular work relationship with them. So we know that they have a good understanding of what the requirements are from the CROs that they work with. There are some people that do come to meetings just to express their right to be displeased with the police overall, which may also bring the focus onto the officer that's there at that meeting. So it's one of those things where we do take community response into consideration, since it is part of a CRO's job to work in that capacity.
Can I follow up with you and ask, when you say you do take that input, how is that input taken? Is it at the meetings? Is it in another forum? Can you tell us more?
It's through email and through phone calls. So I am not at all the community meetings. I do go to those where I'm expressly requested to be there, or it would be a project that would require more of a supervisor role to be able to bring it to a completion. But for me, I speak to my NCPCs on a regular basis, along with the NSC, and they are very local to let me know if they're having any issues or if they're appreciative about how the CROs are handling their duties.
And
Again,
how
interesting.
often does that happen? And do you collect them for the CRO, either yourself or the other CROs you hear them from? Sorry.
I at least on a weekly basis, I'm in touch with my NSC. There are like Angela Moore, Brenda Ivy, and then the NCPC. It's more dependent on when they require my attention. So that could be on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, or a monthly basis.
And then to the extent that you might, as a sergeant, collect for other people reviews or praise, criticism, what have you, or another supervisor, what happens to that information? Where does it go? How does it get stored or saved?
It goes into the ultimately it would go into the officer's performance appraisal, and then before that we would also put it as a supervisory note file through our vision system, which documents positive and negative supervisory note files on the officers and ourselves.
Appreciate that, Lieutenant Fevel.
Yeah, no, Great response by Sergeant Manguy. So ironically, it turns out that we have a system already innately built in to track these things. The performance evaluation, which is standardized across the department, does actually have a community policing model section built in, which specifically speaks to the members' performance in relation to community matters. So that's already in there. With regard to the sentiment of the community, one of two things can occur, and one of two things shall happen. First one, if a community member is particularly satisfied with the performance of a CRO, that could be documented under a letter of commendation or appreciation in their personnel file, and supervisors are mandated to document that. That then transfers annually into their appraisal as a permanent record. Conversely, if they're dissatisfied with the performance of the CRO, they are always entitled to elicit a complaint, which also attaches itself into Vision and permanently into the personnel file, regardless of the finding, and it travels with them. So the evaluation of the CRO metric is not only built into our performance appraisal for all officers, but certainly that of CROs. And there are reporting requirements for the sergeant that will go in the file as a mandatory matter uploaded into Vision.
When feedback is given, is it generally unsolicited? Sergeant Manguy, Lieutenant Fevel? Like, is it just people call you up or email you and say, hey, I want to talk about it, or does it get or do you solicit it?
Well, that's a good question. So actually, I just received a batch of appreciation letters for some of my personnel, 7 of them, and I was dreading having to input all them into Vision because I'm required to, but it was great. I honestly do not, as a supervisor, I do not elicit information from NCs, because I feel like the people that really want to provide me their opinion, they feel very free to do so. And I've never felt that any member of an NC or NCPC has held back their opinion for any particular reason. So I never felt the need to elicit it. If that answers you, perhaps Sergeant Manguy may have a different experience than I did.
For me, it's a mixture of both. I'm very task oriented, so while we're communicating with our NSCs and the NCPCs, they do elicit by themselves that information. But then when it becomes an issue of I have to complete a performance appraisal for an officer, I try to gather as much information as I can. And if there's not enough on an officer for some reason, then I would contact the NSC and NCPC to get that information.
Is there, besides the obvious, it being an extra task that you would have to do for every single officer, is there an MOU or other issue for having it be shall collect?
Yes, there is. There's a prohibitive policy, very strict actually, for the department that says that absent permission from the chief of police, you shall not submit requests for survey. I don't recall the exact details of how that policy came about, but I do recall it in about the 3rd year of my career coming through and everybody receiving department-wide training that we're not to engage in that type of activity. I could get the exact policy for the next meeting.
That seems like an important piece of information to figure out what we do with this particular sentence. I would say that I think it makes sense to review and incorporate community and neighborhood council input, but perhaps if there is such a policy, collecting it might be the issue. Based on what you said, it sounds like there is already the accounting for community input, and perhaps we can't say shall, as Lieutenant Turbio says, we should at least put should to make sure that it is incorporated. Thoughts?
Sounds reasonable to me, sir.
I don't understand why you can't, I just don't see the argument that it could not be shall. Why shouldn't you put down something, even if it's something that is grossly wrong? You know, or there's no evidence to prove what some community member is saying. Why not put it down there? That helps, makes that individual that much more innocent. Nobody believes the complainant. But I don't think a supervisor ought to be arbitrarily saying who they're going to believe, who they're not going to believe when somebody makes a complaint. You don't do that when somebody comes to the police station and says, I want to make a complaint about me being pushed down by a stranger who bumped me. I want to make a complaint about this. You document that.
No, you're right, sir. And we do. The supervisor does not have discretion with regard to complaints alleged by citizens, and it shall go in their personnel file. Just as when I get these letters of appreciation, I don't have a choice whether to input those either.
Yes.
So that all goes in their personnel file already, sir.
Yeah. So we ought to keep shall there.
But the problem that it actually violates a policy when they say that they shall, reach out. I think Mr. Shea said it best, is that soliciting the information is the challenge that we're seeing here.
Pastor
What do you
Jackie?
mean? I
Pastor
maybe
Jackie.
missed that part. I don't see.
Good evening, everyone. And we can go back to the part that Deacon Lyles missed, but I do think it would be good to know and see the policy. I think we need to see that to know what use of language is actually the challenge. And then my question is, if the issue is, Commissioner Shea, as you suggested, around collecting, because I think you said it was around collecting as opposed to soliciting, could it be, or incorporating, could it be considering? Because it stands to reason that the community, if that's the bulk of your work, in addition to the nuts, bolts, and screws, I would think that you would want to know the community's experience and interaction with those particular CROs. But I do think, can we have some kind of notation where we come back to this? Because I'm concerned that if we change shall to should at this point, that we may not come back to it.
Absolutely. I mean, if the community got out, if it got out that, look, I had a problem with this guy and I called the police department several times to complain about it, and there's no record of me calling. How do you defend yourself against that? The way you defend yourself is that, look, if you made a call and you said Reggie Lyles did blah, 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 we documented it. We didn't believe you, but here it is. Here's your complaint. Here's what you said. We found out that he was on vacation that week. I think with the reputation of Oakland Police Department, the last thing you want to get into is not taking and recording what the citizens tell you.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yes, I hear that. It also sounds like Lieutenant Feppel said that they are accepting it and they are documenting it. It sounds like, as Pastor Jackie said, that there is this policy that is out there that says you cannot survey, solicit, or some sort of input about something. I agree with her that we do need to figure out what that policy is. I think we are still looking at, I think that is the basis of the objection to shall. So let's get that policy. Let's figure out what the parameters of it. And perhaps it's instead of, it's about collecting, which department members can't do pursuant to this policy. Maybe it's still shall review and incorporate community and neighborhood council input, which sounds like they do.
Okay, I want to be clear. I'm not advocating, I hear that. I don't think you should go out and try to dig up some dirt on somebody that's trying to do a good job and all of that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying that if the citizens contact the police department or Reggie Lyles is supervisor, and I want to say this about Reggie Lyles, you know, even if it's true or not true, we shall collect that. If you say should, it leaves it open for, look, I called them and maybe they're lying about calling. And then they make an allegation that you just didn't record it. Then we look at the policy. The policy said you have arbitrary decision to collect it and document it or not.
I see.
Yeah, you don't want that. You want to be absolutely, if they call the station or make contact the station about officers' behavior, we document it. We shall document it.
That already is incorporated into current policy under M3. So we have a thing called informal complaint resolution process where you're saying, I don't want to make a complaint, but I want this discussion documented.
So shall ought to be okay right here.
No, I'm not saying that, sir. I'm saying that there is a methodology of documenting your concerns.
I can wordsmith this.
Yeah, well,
Figure out what the
let's be
policy is.
clear.
I
See,
can
that's how we get this. That's how we get this Mack truck gap in between our policies. Look, if we already have a policy saying that you will document informal complaints or whatever, then shall should be right here. It's inconsistent to put should here.
We are not yet at removing shall. It is the department's edit. We're going to vet it. We're going to check it. And I'm going to figure out, perhaps there is a different word besides collect that gets to the point that you're getting to, Reggie, which is if it comes in, you document it and you retain it. You have to do that. You shall do that. Whereas collect is slightly ambiguous to mean like you go out and get it. And I don't think we're disagreeing about that. Mr. DeVries?
I'll take the word receive.
Okay, I hear that. Mr. DeVries.
Hey, Jesse, sorry, I need to head. I had an hour and I just want to let you know I'm leaving. Sounds like you guys are getting close.
Getting there. Getting there.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. All right. And I think the last change is that there's a second paragraph in this community meeting section where italics were removed and footnotes removed. And Lieutenant Turbio says they're going to put back all footnotes. Okay. All right. Got through a pass through. Good job, everyone. Thoughts about going back to some of the things that we've talked about in the past? Maybe we have additional answers, or do we want to take more time with the edits that Lieutenant Turbio has and come back a different time? I'm ready to push on if y'all are. Okay, let's do it. Okay, let's see. We had a discussion for this initial section about the philosophy of community policing. And we talked about inserting a line or a paragraph about culture change. And I recall that Mariano was going to work on it. I have not yet received anything, or I don't remember receiving anything. So I'm going to put a pin on this. It's something that we will have to come back to And hopefully we'll have that and be able to integrate that for our next meeting. I apologize. We had a discussion about this section, this paragraph, this sentence, excuse me, that said, such adjustments will repair the historical harm done by policing. It has been added back. And I think we are good with that since it is what the original form was. Lieutenant Toribio will need to fill out the appendix section about the principles. Let's see, principles. Rephrase. Provide foot patrols as needed. I think this is the big meat of the sections that we need to work on. The first is about reporting out, and the second is about number of open projects and current projects per year and how many open projects and overlapping B projects or not. So let's see. Sergeant Manguy.
Yeah, I'm kind of doing another review of the BFO policy that's currently in place for the CROs. So that one took into consideration the resources available for attaching CROs to NCPCs. So its main goal was to have one CRO per, to have a CRO for each of the beats, and then to only assign a maximum of 2 NCPCs per CRO. I think that would help address the issue where it would still, beats would still have access to a CRO, but the CRO would only be able to, well, it would take into consideration that the CRO has a limited amount of resources to give by themselves. So if it's only 2 NCPCs that they have to work with for beat projects, so it would make things more tenable. And then our CROs are also working with all of the beat officers that are working patrol, who by our own standards, I think it's also like an NSA requirement, have at least 1 to 3 beat projects that they're working on. The CROs assist on these as well. So it wouldn't be a matter of the CROs only have 2 projects they'd be working on. They'd be working on multiple, but maybe indirectly or alongside another patrol officer. But it would be more, I think it would help get around the issue where we would be having where there's multiple NCPCs per beat in certain parts of the city.
When you have a moment, if I may provide some information.
Let me just, thank you. Let me, I think there's another section that gets a little bit to what Sergeant Manguy says, and I'm going to scroll down to it if that's okay. It is something that we went over, which is this section right here, which I'm going to highlight on the screen, says CROs should not be assigned to more than 2 neighborhood councils. That was what you had mentioned, Sergeant Manguy from the BFO?
That is what he was referring to.
Okay. And then also talking about how 1 to 3 projects, sorry, did I miss it? 1 to 3 projects at a time?
So right now, CROs are required to complete 1 project per NC a year. So that would be the most they would be required to finish a year is 2. And I will say that even in my experience, that can be a lift in and of itself. When I took on 8603 Hillside, that project in and of itself took me 4.5 years, one project, and I can't just close it. I think that there are many, many important aspects of this policy, none more important than the other, but this one is absolutely of critical importance because this is where we are looking at these CROs that have numerous NCs, many more than they were originally intended to. They have very limited time. If they're expected to attend the NC meetings just in their basic form is taking between 40 and 50% of their time. The mandating of these projects could literally be untenable just within their 40-hour work period. Now, I would submit to this ad hoc that I could form a presentable timeline and show you how much time the average CRO would have on a 40-hour week to actually complete many of these responsibilities so that we could, in a more educated fashion, craft out their mandated responsibilities in terms of projects so they don't find themselves with a policy that they simply can't fulfill.
Can I just clarify which part of this section might be the problematic part? Which part of paragraph E, F, or G is the problematic part that you're talking about?
So the F is, so it is kind of all of them, right? Because they're all kind of accounting for the same thing. Essentially, the policy, originally when we had 31 CROs and 31 beats, you would have an NC on the X and you would have an NC on the yellow. And they would have one project for each, and they were required to complete that within a year to get fully effective performance evaluation. Reasonable. Try and complete one project within a year for each NC. That no longer exists because they not only have one beat, they have multiple beats, and then they have exponentially more NCs. One CRO currently could have upwards of 6 to 7 NCs. So we're finding ourselves in a position where we would love to deliver the services of an independent project for each NC, but it's simply impossible. And the policy has to reflect that in whatever way we deem reasonable.
Okay, let me stop you there. It sounds like for that, the issue is number G, which says current 1 to 3 projects per year, 1 open project. G was never a part of our original 15-01. There was never a requirement in the original in the one that was developed by this ad hoc to have completed 1 per year per NC.
Yeah, that was, I think, during one of our last meetings where we talked about what's the current standard. For me, I think it seems like there's a little bit of conflict with E. Maintain at least one project centered on a neighborhood council priority per assigned beat. So a CRO could have, right now we have CROs that have 3 assigned beats. So that would go over the 2 max NCPCs that they can be assigned to.
And then with that, Sergeant Manguy, that is at least minimally 6 NCs, of which before, if you have one project centered on a neighborhood council priority, they would have to have at least 6, which is, as we all know, impossible.
Wouldn't this policy require them to go back to 2 NCs per CRO?
It would, and that's a great point you bring up. It's very challenging for the CRO to have to make the difficult decision that I'm going to serve one NC over another, because there's no possible way that we could serve all NCs with our staffing levels. The system was originally designed for fully staffed 31 officers for 31 beats. Each officer had 2 NCs. Beat 31 has 3. They get a little taller lift. But in this policy, it's attainable if we say, yes, you only have to have 2 NCs total, that's reasonable. That can be done. But we have to accept the fact that there will be NCs that will not get projects while others do. That's a tough pill to swallow.
Is it possible to work in a word like triage or something? I mean, if you're not serving one neighborhood over another, it could be argued that the one that you are serving has a greater demand, a more serious problem. And so you articulate that, and that's why we haven't gotten to this other. I know it's a difficult call. You like to serve everybody equally, but that's not how life works, right?
That's a pretty astute observation. If the policy reflects that officers have discretion with the projects based on the needs of the community and the circumstances at the time, then that would allow them to be able to do their job without being in violation of the policy. It's a good point you bring up.
I wouldn't want the officer doing it on, the officer can bring it to the sergeant, but this final decision ought to be, I'd like to have a sergeant's input in on that. An officer ought to be able to come to the sergeant and say, here's my argument. This is why I think we ought to do A versus B, timing, staffing, and here's the problem. And then the sergeant says, I agree with you. I wouldn't want the officer arbitrarily just do it on their own.
I think that's a good stop measure. We could read wordsmith it to say, the CRO will prioritize their projects to the maximum extent of 2 to the NCs that are in most need, pending approval of the sergeant.
Yes.
Staying on this thread for a sec, is sergeant the right level? Is there a different level?
Definitely the sergeant level. They're going to be the most in tune with the subordinate and their capabilities, but our sergeants and CROs also frequently attend community meetings, much more frequently than the SRS commander would. So they would also be in touch with if the officers assessing the priority is actually being the most important for that time, because the sergeant will be in those community meetings frequently as well. And if they're trying to put something up that is not of importance, they'll catch it much more quickly than the commander ever would.
Oh, yeah.
What happens if the CRO is the sergeant? Who do they go to for approval? If
That's smart, Jesse. I must admit. Yeah, then I think it would be appropriate to say their first line supervisor would be a good word to put in there. Their first line, that would apply all the way up to the captain.
In other words, you need 2 people to okay it. And one of them has to be of a higher rank. I like that.
Sounds good.
I will note that I think our paragraph F that is here was our attempt to try to get at this issue last time, which notes that, which has some language, talks about based on police services needed, center on a neighborhood council priority. I think that was language that was there to prioritize or to give CROs the flexibility to choose their projects and whether or not it might center on a neighborhood council priority, meaning they would have the option to not center on a neighborhood council priority. Thoughts about continuing down that line?
I think the neighborhood council priority is very important. Maybe we would, if you have this situation where the officer and the sergeant both agree that they're in opposition with the neighborhood council's priority, they have to have a discussion with them. And even if they don't, if they can't get them, the neighborhood council to agree with them, they have to document that they had that discussion at least. And so soon and very soon, you gotta, you know, get back to that neighborhood council and do what they need done.
Can I just, so when you say in opposition, you mean essentially a CRO might say, I understand you all have this neighborhood council priorities, and it is definitely of the sort that would require a law enforcement response. However, this is a bigger problem and needs to be addressed right now.
Right.
And then implementing some procedure for getting approval of that, and then returning back to the neighborhood council priorities.
Either way, either I personally would do it that way. I would personally try to get my sergeant to see it the way I saw it, you know, and the sergeant may tell me something I don't know, like, oh, no, you don't know the whole full scope of this. So I think before you go to the neighborhood council and tell them you're not going to do something, you express yourself to your sergeant or then the next line supervisor. Then you go to the neighborhood council and explain, you know, look, we can't get to you right now. And we know you have a serious problem. We're not diminishing it, but we are having a more serious problem down the block. And we think that's a higher call. That's why we hire police officers to make those kind of decisions. Yeah, I want them making those kind of decisions, but they have to document it. They have to, you know, say, this is the reason why I'm down here. We have series of kidnappings. We had I don't know, you know, some serious action that you say, look, this is why we're not coming to picking up your project now, because we're working something far more serious than what you think is what your situation is. They don't have to agree with you, but at least you talk to them and you document the date and time you talk to them and who you talk to. And you work your plan. So if they make a complaint to somebody, you know, the police never come by here. You say, yes, we did come by. We saw what their situation was. They got a problem with dumping. But down the street, we got a problem with kidnapping of girls, you know, coming home from school, elementary school. And so we're choosing to get on that problem. Don't you want the police to make those kind of decisions? At least I do. You just
Sergeant Manga here, sorry.
I'm sorry?
No, I'll continue. I will raise my hand.
Go for it, Sergeant Manga.
Just in practicality or implementation, we don't have that issue. I can see it arising, like anything could, but we communicate with the NCP, and we work with them on what we're going to do a beat project on. I don't think I've ever run into a situation where the NCP was, no, we don't want you to do this, when it'd be assisting them with some kind of police matter.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, it's something that could arise. It's just something that has not arisen.
Yeah.
So, because as was being explained, like we work with NCP, we're not there to tell them what their problems are. We're there to listen to them to find out what the problems are so we can help address them.
Yeah, I just, well, then if it rarely happens, then this policy won't be such a big deal. I just want you to have the flexibility that you can make a priority. You can make the decision when you have two people calling you to be at one place at the same time.
One more question, which is the line that was added about CROs are allowed to overlap beat projects as needed. How well will that address the problem of having too many projects required, if at all?
I could give you an example. I used this readily when I was an Area 3 sergeant. And every NC unanimously agreed that human trafficking of minors was a huge deal. And it really was. Sadly, it still is. And that they had to, again, they each got a project, right? So they all banded together to make their project human trafficking. And that allowed every CRO in Area 3 to focus on these extensive human trafficking operations, of which we saved many juveniles. It was great. But it allowed us to do so and not be essentially in violation of the Measure Z matrix. So that's a great example of how everybody could band together on a common goal, so that the NCs, of course, were within policy, but we're also doing something kind of for the greater good. And granted, not all NCs there had human trafficking problems. Many did. So it was a neat sacrifice on the community, but that's one example.
Appreciate that. Sergeant Manguy, for the on the ground, most maybe like last 5 years, how well is this line going about overlapping beat projects going to address not having 6 projects at a time?
If we can fold projects into other projects, then that would be beneficial. But I think we do need to have some kind of actual control, or not have a formula that forces a CRO to have like, hey, you have 3 beats, so you shall have 6 projects. That's something we're trying to avoid, because then, as we touched on before, it'd be a matter of project quality would diminish. We don't have the resources for that kind of heavy load on each officer. So from right now, I'm reading it as a formula. So you're saying 1 project per NCP per assigned beat. So if an officer has 2 or 3 assigned beats, then at minimum, he's going to have 3 projects.
Which you and I both know that just can't be done. It's too much.
Yeah.
I think I have some ideas. I'm gonna try to fill things out and work with Lieutenant Turibio about getting some language in there for the ad hoc to consider, which will make our next meeting a little bit shorter when we're just focused on language and solutions to these issues. Let's talk about now this other section, which we had about reporting on the progress of priorities in a manner and in partnership with neighborhood council. Again, as a reminder, our original language said presenting brief oral reports on the progress of each priority at the meetings, and submitting written reports upon the completion of each step in the SARA process to the extent possible.
So if I could start, I think that it's invaluable that all of our reporting out on our progress is done at the NCs. And especially since COVID has happened, I've seen a tremendous erosion of participation at the NC meetings. As we're in this virtual world, as all of us are on this now, when people find that they can get the data that they want outside of the NC meeting, this collaboration of community members meeting each other, working with each other, I think a lot of it is lost. Also, the reporting out in what I think it was said, like at each step of the process, again, is so cumbersome time-wise. It's just not a reasonable request. The NCs choose their meeting dates. Typically, they're quarterly. Some are more frequent. Very few are less frequent. And it's reasonable for that CRO to have a a good detailed presentation of their progress and everything they've done to get to that point without getting to the micromanagement and just total time destruction of these timeline report outs, which are highly subjective.
I recall, well, any other thoughts on this particular section? This section has changed from a permissive, being permissive about the format of reporting when it was previously mandatory. It was mandatory to provide those oral reports at the meetings. It was mandatory in the 15-01 policy to submit written reports. Now it's permissive as to form, still requiring the reports, but not about each step in the process. Just at the meetings.
I fully agree. They should be reporting out all their progress at the meetings, because sometimes the public will not like the progress and say we need to change. It's that before, it's like every step of the process report out is cumbersome and it's just untenable. But the report outs at the community meetings should be very well structured and very detailed, so the community can make an educated decision on how they want to proceed.
And can they ask you questions?
Oh, strongly encouraged, strongly encouraged. I've had projects where the community says, you know what, this is not going the way we want. This new thing came up. We want to abandon this. Okay, no problem.
I wish Jose Dorado was here because I know this was a big deal for him.
Yeah, I think I can, I won't do it justice, but I know the point. Right, from the department perspective, it's a logistical issue about needing to provide reports and written reports. Frankly, it sounds like they could be emails about the completion of each step of the SARA project, so that the council knows what's going on. And perhaps even the council members can disseminate that to the neighborhood councils to really let people know, so that, you know, the other part of it is sometimes when you report out orally or in person at the meetings, that doesn't give enough time for those, including myself, who think a little bit slower, to really understand what the report is and be able to react or be prepared to ask questions about it. And I think from a community perspective, it's sort of being in touch and being sort of in the know about how long things are taking, what's going on in real time, so that you can, so that they can make informed decisions. So it's sort of a transparency and notice issue on the one side and a logistical issue on the other side. I think that's a big part of it, and not to say that I think both of those are extremely important. I do think we need to sort of have a sense of where we are. I think the department is very clearly on this permissive at the meetings. And our previous version was sort of having report outs, written reports submitted irrespective of meetings. And at some point, I think we need to make a call on which way we go with this and how we get there.
Can the neighborhood captain contact, you know, the police department and get a, you know, and get further reports orally from them?
That's a good question.
So I still to this day have good relationships with current and former NC chairs. They're
Yes.
always welcome to email me, and I provide them with updates. Then communication is key. And I think all CROs are pretty good about doing that.
Jesse, but before we make any changes, would you be willing to contact Jose Dorado?
We're at time anyhow. I set this for an hour and a half. I think we definitely have to come back and do a little bit more work anyhow.
Okay,
So I think Jose will have that chance.
yeah.
Here's my main question. Do we come back in 2 weeks or a month? Lieutenant Fevel, Sergeant Manguy, for the work that, the information you need to get to Lieutenant Toribio and to get us this policy, with enough time so that we could sort of figure stuff out for our next meeting. Do you think 2 weeks is enough time?
Sergeant Manga here. Yeah, I believe that'd be enough.
Yeah, I think we can accomplish that, sir.
Okay, so just to be clear, that means that you are going to identify. You're gonna identify that policy about for both the not soliciting or surveying information, as well as the one about voluntarily leaving early the specialty units and having to go back to a year in patrol. Getting that to Lieutenant Toribio. He would then watch this, try to make sense of my notes, and then make edits as I think we have directed or sort of talked about, and then get it back in time for ad hoc members to review and be able to absorb and to be prepared to discuss the issues on them. Is that 2 weeks enough time?
Thank you for that clarification. I think a month would be fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go with the sergeant on this one. A month would be great.
That's pretty good.
Since you're gonna take a month, what I would ask is that you get us any changes or suggestions or additional information to the ad hoc a week prior to the date we set. Let's figure out that date. So we're looking at either August 31st or September 7th. But as soon as I mentioned September 7th, I realized that we have set an NSA ad hoc meeting on that this September 7th. So I think we're looking at August 31st.
Sounds good.
That'd be 4 weeks, and then getting that an update on language policy and those additional items by August 24th, but of course, working on it internally between myself, Lieutenant Toribio, Lieutenant Fevel, Sergeant Manguy, and anyone else who would like to participate. All right, tentatively, let's set August 31st. Please let us know if there are any issues with that particular date. Thank you all for the time and the work and getting through and showing up. It's how we get things done. So very much appreciate all of your time and efforts. Have a good night. If you'd like to stay on, chat anymore.
Great talking to everyone. Good seeing you guys again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
Mike, I'll call him. Have a good night.
Okay, all right. Do we need the commission? Oh, I'm not a commissioner anyway, though. Bye.
Have a good night.